I want to welcome to the program a very special guest. I've known this gentleman for a long time. He is absolutely a fantastic representative of a great Commonwealth of Kentucky, but he's also got a couple other jobs going on that we want to talk to him about. Congressman James Comer, how are you, sir?
Well, thanks for having me on.
Jamie, this is probably not when you first started your congressional career how you would imagine you'd spend every single day. But it turns out you're sort of a newsmaker these days.
Yeah, the joys and discomforts of being on the front lines of a very credible investigation that poll after poll shows 70% of Americans believe that something bad happened between Joe Biden and his family, but they want to know the truth. They want to know answers, and the media hasn't been doing their job.
Right.
The government agencies weren't doing their job. So we decided to do the investigative work, and I think we've uncovered a lot, but with that's come a lot of arrows and bullets my way.
It turns out. Yeah, so for those of you who don't follow this on a day-to-day basis like we do, Jamie Comer's the guy, he's the reason why you know about any of this stuff.
That's right.
Because as you recall, the Biden campaign and Joe Biden himself started out by telling all of us in the 2020 election that he'd never had any conversations with his son Hunter about a single business dealing ever. And it turns out there was a lack of curiosity in the media. Didn't so much as prompt a secondary question.
It's unbelievable, the negligence of the mainstream media. I mean, you look at the political scandals of the past, when you had, let's take Watergate or whatever. You didn't learn anything that Nixon did wrong, really, through the Watergate committee. You learned it because of investigative reporting.
Yeah.
And then the Watergate committee, they would ask about what they read in the Washington Post or whatever. Not only is the media not tried to dig or report or do any type of investigative reporting on public corruption, which has bipartisan support.
That seems like a kind of a centralized thing that you would want to pay attention to.
They've attacked me for having the audacity to investigate this great ethical family that's running the White House.
Well, what's so amazing, you must be getting closer to the target here, because now you're seeing hit pieces out of the Associated Press. Turns out you're a very wealthy farm hand down in Kentucky. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. And I'm liking this newfound fame, this multi-millionaire farmer. All my golf buddies are having fun with that.
I bet they're having fun with that.
Multi-millionaire, and you know, it's a joke. The Associated Press is a perfect example of the deterioration of journalism in America. And I used to say when I left Kentucky to come to Washington that the one credible news source in America was the AP. They are just as bad as the Washington Post and New York Times now. They ran that piece today. They've been going around Monroe County. You've been to Monroe County before. You know, 10,000 people. Everyone knows everyone. I grew up there, born and raised, stayed there my entire life. And
Associated Press reporter probably sticks out.
Oh yeah. My chief of staff, Caroline's here. They would as soon as he parked his car, people started sending pictures. I bet he's here looking for stuff on Comer. I'm the biggest tourist attraction in Monroe County. All the opposition research. You know that Joe Biden has a war room with 12 paid government employees. So that's where your tax dollars are going to pay Joe Biden's war room to defend the honor of Hunter Biden and the Biden family. And they're in Monroe County, Kentucky, and they stand out like a sore thumb. I mean, when they get out of the car, they can tell right then they're not from Monroe County.
No, I can
and they're snooping and they're trying to find something. So I have a pretty simple business background. I was a director of the local bank, farming operation, and have an LLC that flips some property from time to time, and they wrote, oh, he has a shell company. I'm like, what are you talking about? This came out in the Daily Beast first, which is a real beacon of journalism, you know. He has look, Comer has a shell company. We found it on his financial disclosure form. So it was about, and I thought, what the hell are they talking about? And it had LLC at the back. And all the shell companies that we listed for Hunter Biden had LLC. So this financially illiterate journalist thought, LLC, shell companies. So if anyone doesn't know, a shell company is a company that has no purpose, that has no assets. What the Bidens had were companies set up to do nothing, but they were pass-throughs and they were laundering money. That's what the bank suspicious activity report.
Yep. The U.S. Treasury
They don't have any
themselves says it.
assets. They don't have any assets. So this AP story came today. They talk about my shell company, the similarities between me and Hunter Biden, which is a joke. He said he has a shell company like the Bidens. His shell company has property here and property there, and they sold some property last year. That's called a small business.
Yep.
That's called the reporters in Washington are financially illiterate.
Yeah.
They're financially illiterate. I went on Maria Bartiromo this morning, and she was talking about it, and we're making fun of the AP.
Yeah.
That's how far down the AP's gone.
But I think
I just would like to point out one of the funniest things I think I've seen on Twitter in a week is what you posted in response to that story today. Nick, I think we've got a graphic we can show our audience, and the fellas, you got to see this. This just shows you, it's a visual depiction of the difference between the business models.
And I want to point out, that's not mud. We're standing. That's the remnants of Jamie Raskin's last floor speech. Okay? That's what we're standing in right there.
And I was outraged when I saw this story because, like you said, this is just, it's pathetic and sad of what's become of journalism, where you can have a farm LLC and they're calling it a shell company to try to cover up for someone who obviously is trading on his family name. Assets are being moved through countries like Ukraine, China. This is unbelievable that they would try to, because corruption is a public matter.
Absolutely.
That they would try to cover for corruption, which affects every American, by comparing it to a farm.
Yeah. And you know, the banks pick up on whether or not something's a shell company.
Yeah.
And there's a thing called a suspicious activity report. I was first started talking about this back in March. If you look at the Biden suspicious activity reports, they all are similar. They talk about shell companies. They say they have an investment company with no investments, businesses with no known purpose. They're laundering money between accounts. And that's ironically what that 1023 form that Senator Grassley discovered said. They were the investigators would never find this bribe because of the way the number of accounts they used and the way they set it up. So, you know, if you've got a shell company, you'll get in trouble because the banks will figure it out. Obviously, if you have a company that has assets and has a purpose, then it's not a shell company. And what an LLC is a limited liability company. I set up an LLC because my accountant and lawyer said you need to have one, because one of the things my LLC does is we lease out all this farmland that I have, 1,600 acres of farmland in Kentucky and Tennessee. They ain't found the Tennessee land yet because they're not that good at digging. During deer season, which was just a few weeks ago, I'm speaking redneck, John.
Yeah, no, hey, listen.
I probably had 75 men in tree stands, 10 feet off the ground. They crawl up in those tree stands in pitch dark. I've never met these guys. If they fall out of those tree stands, they're going to sue me.
Yeah.
So we have an LLC, a limited liability company. That's what an LLC is. These reporters have no clue.
No, they don't. But they don't want to either, right? I mean, just the fact that we're having this conversation, the collective lack of curiosity about the facts that you are spilling out there, that ultimately, I mean, look, if it wasn't for your occasional Fox News coverage, or I think there's been some good conservative media that have picked up an awful lot of this, but we learn more from the press releases you're sending out at your committee.
It's incredible, the
than
information.
you would ever read in the pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, or anybody else. And that, to me, in and of itself, tells you everything you need to know about what you're going up against here. Because this is not, like you said, it's not inconsiderable data that you have now come across, which is kind of where I want to start this with you, is where are we at now? Because I know when you started this, we talked about it, and you said, well, we'll see where it leads. I don't know where it is.
Right.
But you all put your shoulder to the wheel, and now it looks like you got some stuff here.
When I started this investigation, my job wasn't to impeach. I don't impeach. I'm the Oversight Committee. The judiciary impeaches. My job was to follow the money, determine what they'd done, file a report, and then pass influence peddling legislation. So the investigation always had a legislative purpose, because we want to define what influence peddling is and ban it in the future. We want to prevent the Menendezes and the Bidens from continuing to do business as usual in Washington.
How dare you embrace good government, Jamie?
Right.
This
well,
is
that's what we want to do. And along the way, we find out. See, when this started, I thought Hunter Biden had an energy company because that was the media narrative. I thought that, okay, they never got any money from China because that's what the Washington Post said. I thought that none of this money ever happened while Joe Biden was vice president, because that's what Joe Biden said. Well, come to find out, most of the money transferred while Joe Biden was vice president. Joe Biden said he never met with any of these people. We knew he had met with one or two of them because of some of the work that Grassley and Johnson had done, and Miranda Devine, and that Marco Polo report and different things like that. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden met with all of them. He met with every one of them. And why lie about that? Well, then what we discovered when we got the bank records, which a lot of backseat quarterbacks were saying, oh, you need to go after their taxes. As someone that's been involved in banking, you can't learn anything from taxes. People cheat on their taxes. And if there were ever tax cheats, it would be the Bidens. And that turned out to be true.
Yeah, right.
Bank statements don't lie. Bank records don't lie. You want their bank records. The bank records showed all this money coming in that they claimed were loans. We learned this from the whistleblowers, from the IRS whistleblowers. The reason they were doing loans is so you don't have to report them on your taxes. There's nowhere on your tax return that would show the $14 million in loans that we found. So through their bank record, they never made principal payments, much less interest payments on these loans. And it looks to me like...
Can we get those kind of loans?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Like
At what point is a loan income or a gift? After how many years does a loan become income? But it looks to me like in 2014, they started the influence peddling big time. And then in 2018, at some point, the IRS rolls in on them. And we know this from the IRS whistleblower notes. They changed the way they were operating sometime in 2018 through the election of Joe Biden. And they went from running these wires to these shell companies, calling them income, and then writing off through the shell companies like what Hunter got indicted on, all of his drugs and sex clubs and everything as business deductions. They just started saying, all right, forget that. We'll just call it loans and we don't have to fool with the IRS. So they started putting everything down as a loan. Then I believe while Joe Biden's been president, this influence peddling has never stopped, and it's going through the art sales.
Yeah,
through the art sales. So everyone should know who's buying this artwork, because he's not an artist.
No.
It's not like he had a big art gallery before. He never did anything art-wise before Joe Biden became president. Now he's the highest-paid artist in America. I don't think the average Joe on the street's buying that.
Is that going to sell in Monroe County?
Yeah, that wouldn't sell in Monroe County. I don't know about Washington D.C.
Well, so look, we've now gotten to a place, and you still yet. Despite the fact that you have laid all of this out in very clear documentation, there's still a collective lack of interest from the media.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, there are not only red flags, there's close to smoking guns around here.
There are a lot of smoking guns. And the fact that we found 5 direct payments to Joe Biden, they claim they're all loan repayments. If you loan me... Or if I loan you $240,000, Josh, and you pay me back $240,000, then I should have a check to you for $240,000 before you send me a check.
Yeah, it turns it's not a one-way loan repayment.
That's right.
Yeah,
but they don't have that check. It's just like there was an email released from a bank examiner that said, "What is this $5 million wire into this shell company from China?" And it appears Hunter replied back, "It's a loan."
From China.
From China. So the bank said, okay, and this is what you do. The bank doesn't just file a suspicious activity report on a prominent person without calling them first. Because when you file a suspicious activity report, if you're a bank, you're inviting the bank examiners to come in. And if you file a suspicious activity report on the son of the Vice President of the United States, the bank examiners will roll in within 24 hours. So they want to make sure. And they say, what is this? And he says it's a loan. And they say, okay, well, we need the loan documents for the bank examiners. Well, I don't have any. And so they're like, no, wait a minute. China didn't give this guy who, according to the new media reports, is on drugs, is broke, is going through a divorce, $5 million without a contract. This could be a bribe. This could be something.
Yeah.
So they filed a suspicious activity report. And that's
one we were assured would never happened.
That's right. That's right. So even this bank examiner who's trained to pick up on fraud picked this out. It wasn't hard. And then the media tries to act like, oh, there's nothing to see here. When I started talking about the suspicious activity reports, they tried to insinuate, oh, everybody gets a suspicious activity report, like it was a overdraft fee or something.
No.
And that's just not true. My bank is one of the 10 top Kentucky domiciled banks in Kentucky, and we would do about 2 a year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And most of the banks in Kentucky, Josh, talking to the bank president, they do about 2 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about a family that had 170 suspicious activity reports.
I mean, that's
and then
wild.
they were subject of another 50. I would say that's number one in America.
It's wild, and there's just absolutely zero curiosity from the press to find out what this is all about. They just won't even write it. I mean, that has to be so frustrating.
It is frustrating. Well, the Washington Post today, they say, oh, the House voted to open the impeachment inquiry, even though there was no evidence of wrongdoing by Joe Biden.
That's what I get stuck on.
That's a lie.
It's a
That is-
blatant
It's a lie in black and white.
Because it is, right? I mean, look, no evidence. I mean, you could quibble around some evidence if you had a total lack of curiosity and you wanted to throw it all under the rug. You could quibble about whether things are smoking guns or not. But to say there's no evidence is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't. It's got to be incredibly frustrating.
It's frustrating, and I tried to get along with the reporters. I've had this fantasy in the beginning that they would respect me, and that I voted to certify the election. When people in my party behave badly, I don't talk about it.
Well, you've got a reputation as
Right.
being a serious guy.
I thought I did when I started, but they've tried to create this narrative like, oh, he's like Rudy Giuliani, he's he's a loose cannon and all this. But everything that we say, we back up with evidence, with bank records, and we've been very transparent in this administration, in this investigation. And I tell these reporters, I say, you all missed an opportunity. One of you, this is the Washington, D.C. press corps, when they're always gaggling around me when I go in to vote or come out of voting on the House floor. One of you all could have been a Woodward or Bernstein.
Yeah.
But you have squandered that opportunity.
Yeah.
And nobody in America believes you.
Right.
How does that make you feel? I mean, I'm not even nice to the press corps anymore. I have no
That's
respect
just truth.
for it.
That's honesty.
It is the truth.
That's honesty. That's
It
the
is.
truth right there.
It is.
So, look, what did you make of this week's performance by Hunter coming up on the Capitol steps and doing a little press conference, seemingly sort of trying to thumb the eye of anybody who's sort of looking into anything? I mean, completely divorced from reality in many different respects. But how do you take that as somebody who's now, what you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a perfect example of the arrogance and entitlement of the Biden family. That was on full display. No one who's represented by the type of legal team he's represented by would have allowed their client to do that if they didn't have a pardon in their back pocket. And I think that anybody that's kept up with this investigation, anyone that cares about good government or is disturbed by public corruption, should be sick at their stomach that this is the behavior of the family that has the keys to the nuclear code, that has the bully pulpit, that's the leader of our country, that's setting policy direction and is supposed to be in charge of our national security. I mean, this is a bad deal. They've taken tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world, and they can't say what they did to receive the money. And pretty much what Hunter Biden said, it's none of your business. Go fly a kite.
Yeah. I mean, the influence peddling is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, that I don't think there's any doubt about. Even your biggest critics, I think, would say Hunter Biden may not be the most qualified person to provide energy advice,
Right.
international energy advice, and yet he was paid millions of dollars to do so. So that piece of it is super clear. Where everybody seems to be hung up with challenging you on is whether or not there's a connection between Hunter and Joe Biden. And what you just said in the first 10 minutes of this interview pretty much should erase that. But yet, like, what do you have to demonstrate for people to come to that same conclusion?
I mean, Congress has a 13% approval rating. 70% of Americans believe that Joe Biden did something wrong here.
Yeah.
The only source of that information has been the work of the House Oversight Committee.
Yeah.
The great staff on the Oversight Committee, the members of the Oversight Committee, which, you can go down the roster, and there are members that everyone has a lot of different opinions of on the Oversight Committee. But one thing we're all very good at is messaging. They have huge social media followings. They do podcasts. I mean, we represent a big part of the America that where they get their alternative sources of news. And one of our members is on one of the major podcasts every day. And thank God Americans are getting their news from somewhere besides the newspapers now.
No kidding.
And I think that despite the low approval rating of Congress, people appreciate what we're doing in this investigation and want us to follow through, or we wouldn't have gotten a unanimous vote on the House floor. And, the media were trying to obstruct this. They were going to the moderate members saying, do you think this will hurt you?
Yeah.
Are you worried when you go home you're going to have to answer to your voters why you voted for this impeachment inquiry? Wow. And I stuck my head in. Manu was asking somebody that, or one of the reporters. I said, you should be asking the moderate Democrats that. Are you ashamed to go home and say you don't want public corruption investigated by Congress? You just want to let it go.
Yep.
And of course they turned the TV off after that. I mean, it's
well, he certainly didn't ask the good people of Monroe
That shows
County.
how bad they are. Oh, they did. The AP went. They interviewed a bunch of people, but none of them made it in the story. They
Well, it's
wrote.
hard to find a critic.
I get 97%.
Yeah,
that's
right.
pretty.
It's not bad.
It's hard to do well in a little town where you grew up and everybody knows everything about you. But
One thing that's really noticeable is the way that the media has approached this story is basically throwing the kitchen sink of trying to get ahead of it and create excuses of being like, oh, well, this is, this was an addict in recovery. And I mean, that is so insulting to so many people, especially now that so many Americans know somebody who suffered through fentanyl or a number of issues that have been happening in this country. I mean, what step of recovery is getting money wired from China? Is that like step 5? Because, I mean, to say that, well, this is just like, an addict, to try and draw sympathy from someone who clearly does not care and feels like you said that they've got a back pocket pardon waiting for them.
Well,
one of the members of the Democrat committee, I can't remember, a female member of the Oversight committee, said that the only thing Joe Biden's guilty of is loving his son. And I wanted to come up to her and say, so if somebody carjacks your car in Washington, D.C. in the next hour, as long as their daddy loves them, can they keep your car?
Yeah.
Because, look,
that's it.
There's no excuse for not paying your taxes. Right?
Yeah.
Joe Biden wanted to double the size of the IRS to go after tax cheats. Well, if he wants to see a bunch of tax cheats, then have them all over to the White House for Christmas dinner and have his family there, because those are the biggest tax cheats in America.
And who amongst us hasn't had too much to drink and gotten shaken down by a warlord in a third of the world country, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's the disconnect that I find so amazing. They're trying to hang this all on Hunter's personal problems. Of course, there are many. But it doesn't change the public corruption angle at that. And also the still unanswered questions that you're getting closer and closer to answering. Was there official action ever taken in some of these things? In some places, look, we remember the story about Burisma. We remember what Joe Biden, the vice president's opinion was on the people who were investigating Burisma. We remember the payments from Burisma to Hunter, and we know about the meetings. I don't know. It just seems to me like that all is a pretty close to comfort deal. And now you've stacked an amazing amount of evidence on top of it of different examples of this happening. That's public corruption. That's what that is.
Yeah. And with the Burisma stuff, I think what really brought this back into play was when Grassley came to me with that 1023 that 2 whistleblowers had turned over to him. Those whistleblowers were aware of the 1023. And it had sat there for years. They never thought much about it because the media said, oh, the Burisma was made up, Rudy Giuliani, Russian disinformation. But then they started watching our investigation. Wait a minute. What did he find out they did in Romania? What did he find out they did in China? They had all these shell companies and all these bank accounts. That's what the 1023 said. And they're like, that is consistent with what the Oversight Committee is producing in these other countries. So they came to Grassley because they had a relationship with Grassley and said, look, we don't know if this 1023 alleging bribery by Joe Biden is true or not, but we know one thing. The FBI never investigated it. And we know that it's consistent with what the Oversight Committee's finding. We didn't know there were shell companies. We didn't know that they had multiple bank accounts, that they were transferring funds to and from. Through these shell companies. We didn't know they were doing this type of stuff in Romania and China and Uzbekistan and Russia. So we're very concerned that this 1023 could be legitimate because this human source is one of the most credible, highest paid human sources in the entire FBI.
I mean, it's amazing.
And they won't even ask the question. You know, we often say on the Variety program that if you want a government to be held accountable by the media, vote Republican, because Republicans are the only ones the media is interested in holding accountable. And it seems like if you want to hold a Democrat accountable, you go to work for Chairman Jamie Comer, because that's your best chance to dig into the details, to follow the lead wherever it's going to go, because you're interested in the truth. You're interested in making things better. Right now, the media is no interest in that, and it's one of the most demoralizing things about opening a newspaper today.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I think that in summation to that, Mr. Chairman, where do you think this ends? Like, where do you think ultimately this whole thing ends?
I think that from my standpoint on the Oversight Committee, once we do these depositions, once we hopefully get these pseudonym emails that the White House said there was nothing there, but now we know they sent dozens and dozens of emails, Joe Biden, to Eric Sherwin in a pseudonym when he said he, number one, never communicated with Eric Sherwin, and number two, he had a wall between the government and Hunter's private business. And then some of those emails popped up in the indictment in California. So that's part of what they're withholding from us, the information. We should be able to get those emails in a simple FOIA request because they were government emails. They're not classified. Once we get those emails, once we finish these depositions, then we'll do what I said when we launched the investigation. We'll issue a report. I have no doubt there'll be criminal referrals for more than one person in there. Then if the Judiciary Committee wants to take it and go further, then that's what'll happen. I don't impeach the Judiciary Committee with Jim Jordan. They do that. And then we're going to focus on influence peddling legislation. I mean, surely to God, the Democrats will come around and say, "All right, you're right. We don't need to find any more senators with gold bars. You know, we don't need to have any more
Maybe that's the
prominent politicians' kids getting tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world and then spending it all on hookers and crack and everything else."
I mean, I'd love to see them vote against that ahead of an election. Because the attitude that they've taken of how okay they are with this corruption is just stunning. It's unbelievable.
Right.
Maybe the gold bars are the way they're loaning money to each other.
See, you know, that's a way to hide from the IRS too. But I don't know where you take a gold bar. You know, the pawn shops I know in my district, they wouldn't know what to do with those gold bars.
Like, hey man, what are you giving me this heavy old rock for?
Yeah.
Well, we don't have any hookers or gold bars here at the Variety program, but we do have bourbon, lots of bourbon, and we brought some in here today, so you feel like you're at home.
I feel like I'm at home.
And what I would love, we were talking earlier about Jefferson's. They're building a new distillery on the Bourbon Trail. If you could tell for our audiences who maybe haven't been to Kentucky what the Bourbon Trail is, why they got to check it out.
Yeah. The Bourbon Trail is one of the biggest success stories in Kentucky government. This was set up when I was a young member of the Kentucky General Assembly. And I remember on the House floor, people said, people come from all over the world to watch us make bourbon, and they might watch us make barrels and all. And I thought, no, it's not going to be like Napa Valley. But I believe it's bigger than Napa Valley.
Yeah.
So all your good bourbon comes from Kentucky. Most of it comes from my congressional district. And the Bourbon Trail is where you can go on the trail and go and visit different distilleries and watch them, how they make bourbon. Every bourbon distillery is different. It's unique. It's a way of life in Kentucky. We're proud of that way of life. It's a huge economic engine in Kentucky, and it's really a unique travel experience, and whether you like bourbon or not. So I highly recommend people come to the Bourbon Trail. This distillery is in Marion County, Kentucky. We have also in Marion County, which is Lebanon, Kentucky, we have Maker's Mark, Bullet, and Yellowstone. If anybody watches Yellowstone Distillery advertises on that TV show. They're the descendants of Jim Beam, the owner of that guy named Steve Beam. So, just right there in that one county, there's 4 unique distilleries to visit.
Oh, it's so cool.
It sounds like the happiest place on earth.
Yeah.
Well,
we got to do like an episode from the Bourbon Trail at some point.
and I think the chairman's
Chairman's
got
got
to
to
with
be
us
there.
on that deal.
Maybe when you're done with all this,
Love it.
boring work, the tough stuff.
Well, listen, you're welcome here anytime. And anything that you all need to get out there, you're more than welcome to come out. I'd love to catch up more about this and all kinds of things in the future. But in the meantime, thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you all for educating people on this investigation. Anything you ever need from me, don't hesitate to let me
And
know.
for all our listeners, please follow GOP Oversight on Twitter. That account, I mean, the documents are there. The charts are there.
Evidence.
The facts, the evidence is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all.